I had to dress my daughter for her funeral when I should have been dressing her for her prom. I had to go to her graduation and watch my nephew and her friends graduate, and she wasn't there. What he took from me, I could never get back. And I just want to make sure that he never gets to take anything else from anybody else.
January 10th, 2023, Williamsburg, Virginia. It's a date her family will never forget because it was the day Honesty Selby turned 18. Friends say she was radiant that evening, still glowing from the birthday calls, the laughter, and plans for the future. Just hours earlier, she'd been talking about cosmetology school, maybe phlebotomy, picturing the next chapter of her life. But by the next night, January 11th, she was gone. Her phone went silent, messages went unanswered, and less than 24 hours after stepping into adulthood, her family would find her lifeless body on a remote logging path off Blue Ridge Trail in Isle of Wight County. The medical examiner says she'd been shot once, killed. Police say the last person she was with was a man she'd been dating for just 2 months, 21-year-old Andarius McClelland, a man who, according to investigators, used an alias, took her by Uber to his brother's Newport News apartment, and then somehow, within hours, she ended up abandoned on that cold dirt road. The question is, what happened in those missing hours? Why was her body found by the very people who loved her most and not by law enforcement? And why, over a year later, has justice still not been delivered? Welcome to True Crime 911, where we tell the real stories of lives stolen far too soon. And listen, if you think tragedies like this could never happen to someone you know, you're wrong. The truth is, danger can be a lot closer than you think. If you're not subscribed right now, ask yourself, when the next victim's name hits the headlines, will you be hearing their story here, or wishing you'd been paying attention sooner? Subscribe now. And if you refuse, head to the comments and tell us why you're okay ignoring stories that might one day save a life. Tonight, the short life of Honesty Selby and the 60 days that ended in murder. Honesty Selby was born on January 10, 2005, in Williamsburg, Virginia, a small, historic city where everybody seems to know everybody. She grew up surrounded by family, friends, and a community that watched her grow from a little girl into a young woman. People who knew Honesty didn't just describe her as friendly. They called her bubbly, outgoing, and vivacious. She was the kind of person who could walk into a room full of strangers and, within minutes, have them laughing, talking, and feeling like old friends. Her smile was the first thing people noticed, and her energy made you want to stay around her a little longer. Friends say she loved taking photos, making TikToks, and sharing moments from her daily life, always upbeat, always with that quick sense of humor that made people want to follow her lead. She wasn't shy about her opinions, but she had a way of saying things that didn't push people away. She also had plans, real plans for her future. At 18, many teens are still figuring things out, but Honesty was already looking into cosmetology school, eager to learn the craft of hair and makeup. She also talked about becoming a phlebotomist, working in healthcare, and using her people skills in a job that mattered. To her family, she was more than just a daughter or a sister. She was their bright spot, the one who could cheer you up after a bad day. To her friends, she was that person who would answer the phone no matter the hour. On January 10, 2023, she turned 18. She was officially an adult, ready to take on the world. But before she could even see the second day of adulthood, her life would be stolen in a way no one could have imagined. In the weeks leading up to her disappearance, 21-year-old Andarius McClelland was involved in what investigators described as an on-again, off-again relationship with the 18-year-old Honesty Selby. According to law enforcement, McClelland first contacted Honesty through messages on social media, and within a short time, they'd begun spending time together, sometimes in Williamsburg, sometimes in Newport News. The relationship wasn't steady, but it held enough gravity in Honesty's life for them to meet regularly over that 60-day span. During those visits, Honesty relied on Uber to travel between cities. Investigators later pieced together that on the day of her disappearance, January 11th, McClelland had sent her $30 via Cash App under the alias Lucas Duke so she could take an Uber from Williamsburg to his Newport News apartment. Friends who shared her apartment confirmed Honesty referred to him as Darius and had shown him on FaceTime, a name they didn't think raised suspicion at the time. In one of their last in-person encounters, the two returned to Newport News together. Surveillance and license plate readers later tracked a 2021 Dodge Charger belonging to McClelland's brother, driving from Isle of Wight County back to Newport News late that night, with traces of dirt matching the remote logging trail, where Honesty's body was later discovered. It was clear. Honesty's final hours were tied to this relationship. 2 months of off-and-on dates, the journey to Newport News, the borrowed car now bearing evidence of a crime scene. Suddenly, every message, every drop in location data, and every spent dollar for an Uber became a vital clue. And that was the moment when the romance turned into tragedy. To understand what happened to Honesty Selby, you have to look at the ground she covered in her final hours. Williamsburg, the historic city where she grew up, a place where cobblestone streets and colonial charm mask the everyday struggles of modern life. From there, it's roughly an hour's drive southeast to Newport News, a busy, urban stretch along the James River, where traffic is heavy, neighborhoods vary block by block, and the wrong address can lead you into trouble fast. And in between sits Isle of Wight County, mostly rural, quiet, thick woods, farmland, and back roads where cell service drops out, and the only sounds are the wind and the occasional passing truck. It's the kind of place where if something happened to you, it might be hours before anyone even knew you were there. On the night of January 10th, 2023, the eve of her 18th birthday, Honesty left Williamsburg and headed toward this triangle of towns. She was stepping into a routine she'd done before, catching a ride, meeting McClelland, and spending the night away from home. But there was nothing routine about what was about to unfold. She had no idea she was stepping into the most dangerous 24 hours of her life, and by the next night, she wouldn't make it back. It was a milestone every young person waits for, Honesty's 18th birthday. She spent it surrounded by family, laughing, eating cake, and soaking in the moment. Friends posted messages on social media. Her phone lit up all day with calls and texts. She was officially an adult, and the excitement showed. But less than 24 hours later, everything would change. On January 11th, Honesty ordered an Uber. Her destination, Newport News, to meet up with someone she'd been seeing for the past 2 months. His name was Darius Keon McClelland, but to her and to most people who knew him casually, he was just Darius. The ride from Williamsburg to Newport News took her out of the comfort of her hometown and into unfamiliar territory. It wasn't the first time she had gone to see him, but something about that night, her last night, would stand apart from all the others. That Uber driver would be one of the last confirmed people to see Honesty Selby alive. After that Uber ride, Honesty's phone activity began to slow down. Texts to friends became shorter, replies less frequent. By that evening, the messages stopped altogether. For her family, this wasn't normal. Honesty was known to check in, if not with her mom, then with her close friends. And when hours passed without a single response, unease started to turn into alarm. Calls went unanswered. Social media, quiet. Her location on tracking apps stopped updating. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Her last known contact was believed to be with McClelland, but he wasn't picking up his phone either. This is exactly why we covered these cases. Honesty's last day began like any other, but it ended in silence. If you think knowing the warning signs is optional, think again. Every time you scroll past without subscribing, you're choosing not to learn the patterns that could help protect you or someone you love. Subscribe now, or tell us in the comments why you'd rather stay in the dark. By the morning of January 13th, worry had turned into desperation. Honesty's family wasn't content to just wait for answers. They started tracking her phone. Using location data from her last known signal, they narrowed the search to a rural stretch of road in Isle of Wight County. It was miles from her home, far from any friend's house, and nowhere near where she was supposed to be. They drove out there themselves, scanning the ditches, the tree line, the frozen January fields. But there was no sign of her, just the haunting knowledge that her phone had stopped moving here. For a family that knew her habits, this wasn't just out of character, it was terrifying. Honesty didn't disappear. She didn't go days without speaking to her mother, and now her digital trail had gone cold in a place she had no reason to be. Later that same day, January 13th, law enforcement was called to the 30,000 block of Blue Ridge Trail in Isle of Wight County. Lying in the cold, just off the roadway, was the body of 18-year-old Honesty Selby. She was dressed in the same clothes her family had last seen her wearing. The scene was quiet, still, but the violence that brought her here was unmistakable. An autopsy would later confirm what investigators already feared. Honesty had been killed by a single gunshot wound. No sign of a struggle, no immediate witnesses, and no answers as to how she ended up in this remote spot just 2 days after her birthday.
Well, tonight a homicide investigation is underway in Isle of Wight County.
Deputies found a woman's body on a remote logging trail. Authorities say it was 18-year-old Honesty Selby, who disappeared just 1 day after her birthday. Now investigators are looking for the person responsible. Emily Harrison has the details.
She never deserved to pass like that. She deserved a long and happy life.
Honesty Selby had just turned 18 years old when her family reported her missing 2 days later. Then that same night, deputies discovered her body abandoned on Blue Ridge Trail.
It's my understanding she was set to graduate high school in May. She should be planning what her future entails, and instead we are trying to plan out a memorial service.
From the moment investigators arrived at that dirt road, they knew time was working against them. Whoever had killed Honesty could be anywhere, and the first 48 hours would be critical. They started where any modern investigation begins, her digital footprint. Bank records, phone data, rideshare logs, anything that could point them toward her final hours. That's when something unusual popped up. A recent Cash App payment sent from Honesty to a name that meant nothing to her family. Lucas Duke. On its own, that might have seemed random, but to detectives, the alias wasn't random at all. They knew that name. It was tied to an active account belonging to 21-year-old Andarius Kenyon McClelland, the man she'd been seeing for roughly 2 months. That single payment told them 2 things. Honesty had been with McClelland shortly before her death, and money had exchanged hands. The question was, for what? Uber records gave investigators the next piece of the puzzle. On January 11th, just 1 day after her birthday, Honesty had ordered a ride from her home in Williamsburg. The drop-off location wasn't a friend's house, a store, or a public spot. It was an apartment in Newport News, registered to McClelland's brother. To the police, the pattern was becoming clear. Cash sent to McClelland under an alias, a direct ride to his family's apartment, and then nothing. No texts, No calls, no social media posts. But when officers tried to track McClellan down for questioning, they found something even more alarming. He wasn't at the apartment. He wasn't at work. He wasn't anywhere. Just hours after Honesty was last seen, McClellan had vanished. With McClellan nowhere to be found, investigators dug deeper. Surveillance footage from nearby businesses placed him out in public shortly after Honesty's disappearance. But what caught detectives' attention wasn't just where he went, it was what he was wearing. His shoes and vehicle appeared to carry traces of a reddish-brown soil, the kind not commonly found in urban Newport News. Samples were collected and compared to dirt from the remote road in Isle of Wight County where Honesty's body had been discovered. The match was undeniable. That single connection between the crime scene and McClellan's movements tightened the noose around him. It was enough for the police to move in. But when they did, the path to justice took a disturbing turn. January 13th, just 2 days after Honesty's body was found, the manhunt came to an end. Acting on leads from surveillance footage and location data, Hampton police moved in on a small residential neighborhood. There, parked quietly outside a relative's home, was the vehicle investigators had been searching for, the same one seen on camera with traces of that distinctive soil. Officers approached cautiously. They knew McClellan could be armed, and they couldn't risk him slipping away again. With tactical units in place, they made their move. Within minutes, the 21-year-old was in handcuffs, silent, refusing to answer questions. News of his arrest spread quickly. In Williamsburg, where Honesty grew up, the shock was palpable. Friends described her as bubbly, outgoing, the kind of person who could walk into a room and light it up. Now those same friends were grappling with the reality that her life had been cut short, allegedly by someone she trusted enough to spend her last day with. In a small, tight-knit community like this, word travels fast. Parents began warning their teenagers to be careful about who they meet up with. Social media filled with tributes, photos of Honesty's smile, and hashtags demanding justice. But even with McClellan in custody, the case was far from over. Prosecutors still needed to prove what happened in those final hours, and why. By August of 2023, 7 months after Honesty's death, the case took a turn no one in her family had anticipated. A court-appointed psychiatrist evaluated Andarius McClellan and determined he was incompetent to try stand, at least for now. That ruling meant the proceedings would be paused, giving him time to receive treatment in hopes of restoring his competency. For Honesty's loved ones, it was another crushing setback. Every day without a trial was another day without answers, another day without closure. And delays like this aren't rare. They're part of the system. But to grieving families, each delay feels like a wound reopening. They attend hearings hoping for movement, only to walk out with the same empty hands they walked in with. Every delay in justice is another blow to the families left behind. If you think these delays don't matter because it's not your loved one, that's exactly how tragedy blindsides people. Hit subscribe now so you don't ignore the warning signs in your own backyard. And if you won't, go to the comments and explain why you're fine with not knowing until it's too late.
In the months that followed, the streets of Williamsburg lit up with candlelight. Vigils were held in church halls, school auditoriums, and on neighborhood sidewalks. Her family stood before crowds, clutching photos and holding back tears. They didn't just want justice in a courtroom, they wanted her life remembered for the light she brought. Her laugh, her generosity, the way she made everyone feel like they mattered. Friends spoke openly about the little things, the text messages that always started with, "You good?" The way she'd stay on the phone until you fell asleep if you were going through something. For them, those memories are now treasures they never thought they'd need to hold so tightly. But behind the tributes, a question still lingers. Why? Was her killing planned, or was it a reckless, impulsive act born out of rage? Court documents haven't revealed a clear motive, and without a trial, those details remain locked away. And maybe the most painful question of all, could it have been prevented? Could someone have spotted the signs earlier? Could one conversation, one phone call, one warning have changed the outcome? For Honesty's loved ones, those questions aren't just about closure. They're about making sure no other family has to live with the same unanswered what-ifs. Honesty Selby should still be here, laughing with her friends, planning her future, chasing the goals she talked about so often. Stories like this are never easy to tell. They take hours of research, piecing together timelines, reading court documents, and listening to the voices of grieving families because their pain deserves to be heard exactly as it happened. This video isn't just content, it's a responsibility. If Honesty's story shook you, imagine hearing a knock on your door, but this time, it's about your child, your sister, your best friend. That's why True Crime 911 exists. Not for clicks, not for shock value, but to give you the knowledge and awareness that could save someone you love. So hit subscribe right now. Don't tell yourself you'll do it later. Later might be too late. And if you can truly walk away without clicking that button, then head to the comments and explain why you're okay turning your back on stories that could make a difference. We'll be reading every word.